our superstars, Alan May and Todd Fuhrman, here with us on HQ to discuss. As the Stanley Cup Final is set, it is the Oilers and the Cats. As mentioned, gentlemen, the travel is no joke. 2,541 miles between Edmonton and Sunrise. It's the longest distance between two teams in a Stanley Cup Final ever. Todd, that's pretty crazy. I know you were saying you were crunching some numbers, doing some things with the airports and all of that travel.
You know, I was kind of curious, Jack, on how easy it was to get from Sunrise to Edmonton. I think you have to stop 3 times. You have to take a Greyhound bus, maybe a Conestoga wagon to try and be able to finish the journey to make it complete. But the one thing I will say, when we look at the layout of the schedule, the NHL kind of built in an extra rest day. So when we change venues, we have an extra rest day mixed in. And the series, should it go to game 5, 6, or 7, is going to get real elongated at the end. So they kind of understood the potential dynamic that was in play there. And I think that's going to benefit these teams, having that extra day of travel, knowing it is not as easy as trying to get from Sunrise to Las Vegas, like I know NHL media members were crowing about, going from one beautiful paradise in the sun to the luxury of the Las Vegas Strip. A little bit different, but I also don't want to cast aspersions at Allen's hometown of Edmonton, Alberta.
You know, and both of these teams are used to the travel. You know, it's not like Edmonton's had an easy travel schedule at all. The only easy trip they have is Edmonton to Calgary. Florida Panthers, they've got tough travel as well. So this will not be an excuse. It's a 3,000-mile drive if you're going door to door in your car, and that takes kind of forever. But they have the luxury of private jets. They will maybe land once on the way. I'm not sure if you can go all that way on one tank of fuel, but I'm sure you can, since you can't cross the pond. But you know, they live in luxury now. They have first class. Everything will be easy, and it's just more time for the coaches to communicate with everyone, the players to socialize with one another, and then they get to play these awesome games in the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah, thank goodness we have evolved and they're not driving, because that's intimidating. We're going to talk about both sides on their own, starting with the Panthers. Tkachuk said it. He said, hey, we knew we would be back here, and this is a team that's healthy this go around. It's not that Cinderella story of the 8th seed that's making this magical run to the final. When you think about the teams, the goaltending they had to get through to get here, they deserve to be here, Alan. But what about this Panthers team is much more dangerous than last year's team?
I think the additions that they've made, the depth that they have, and most importantly, they're healthy. That's one of the most important ingredients to winning in the playoffs. You've got to stay healthy. And last year, Ekblad was so beat up. Montour was beat up. Tkachuk couldn't even function in the finals, and he couldn't play at the end. So when you look at that, to have all of their health, you go from health, you look at goaltending. Sergei Bobrovsky no longer is a question mark. He's an exclamation mark as to how he plays. He's the best goaltender remaining in the playoffs. They've got a belief. They've got balance in their roster. I love their defense. I love all 12 of their forwards, whoever they choose to put in, because they've got 15 guys that can play up front, and you don't have to be worried about any of them. They get the best defensive player in the National Hockey League in Barkov, and then you've got a 57 goal scorer in Sam Reinhart. You've got Matthew Tkachuk, one time, I can't even remember if he had 100 points this year. There's so many numbers inflated throughout the National Hockey League. But they've got a roster. They've got Carter Verhaeghe. When I look at them, they are so well balanced. They have the better roster. They don't have the better high-end players, but the Florida Panthers have the better roster, top to bottom, when you look at the balance of it.
Talking about high-end players, let's talk about the Oilers, because they're looking to be the first Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup since 1993. Those high-end players, Connor McDavid, Draisaitl, they also have Hyman, who's been fantastic in the postseason. Is that enough, Alan, against this Florida team that you talked about that is very complete from top to bottom?
Well, the problem is, you know, when you compare the rosters and you're talking about depth and balance, you know, there's a disparity in the Edmonton roster. They're very top-heavy. It's McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. They're all phenomenal, excellent hockey players. But there's lesser guys. But as we saw in the last game, McDavid is superhuman. He is a human highlight reel. He rises up to the occasion. He's gotten better because he's getting healthier right now. So as I was a young kid growing up and then playing against Wayne Gretzky, he did things you thought were not possible. He could put the team on his back and win games. Coaches weren't as good back then. Coaches are better now. McDavid is a superstar. He will rise and shine in this series, but he's never faced anything like this pack mentality of the Florida Panthers. They're as old school as it gets. They're fast, they're gritty, they're tough, they're annoying, and they're great for hockey. And I think they're going to be all over him. They're going to hit him every chance they get. They're going to go after him after the whistle. So what will McDavid and Draisaitl and Hyman and Nugent Hopkins, what will their frustration levels be like after the end of this series? If those guys stay healthy, this ends up being a long series. I believe in both of these teams. I'm happy it's the two that are still standing, because you've got the superstars against this rat pack that just plays so well together.
Yeah, the Cats are a physical team for sure, but honestly, McDavid, watching him, it's not fair. He's just so much faster than everybody else out there on the ice. It's kind of crazy. Let's get to the wagering here. The Cats are favored on home ice for Game 1. The total sitting at 5.5. Todd, where are you finding value for Game 1?
Well, the numbers leaked out a little bit, Jacqueline. We actually saw Florida open a slightly shorter favorite here, and you can understand why there's a little bit of optimism around this Panthers team in Game 1. I mean, Allen talked about this rat pack mentality, and Florida's gone through an evolution to get to this point. They were the President's Trophy winner a couple of years ago. They came up short in the postseason, and Bill Zito realized that, you know what? He had to change the DNA of this roster. So what happens? It takes them a little while to gel. Last year, they're the last team into the playoffs, and they were the second to last team standing, coming up just short against the Golden Knights in 5. I think all of that experience has been evident in this postseason run. The players have said it, and when you look at that quiet confidence, I think it'll carry forward into this series. And while this isn't meant as a slight at Stuart Skinner, who is Edmonton's best player in that closeout game against Dallas, this is actually a step down for Florida in terms of the caliber of goaltender that they've played through the first 3 rounds. When you look at going through Andrei Vasilevsky round 1, Jeremy Swayman, who stood on his head in round 2, and Igor Shesterkin, who was the only reason the Rangers were able to force 6 games. I think we're talking about a game where we could see a little bit more offense, especially with the layoff here. Look, Florida on the same side, they've committed to that defensive cause, and to Allen's point, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are going to have to work tooth and nail against Sasha Barkov and, of course, Sam Bennett. We saw JT Miller do a pretty good job clamping down for stretches against McDavid in the series against the Canucks, but I think with the layoff and the total being relatively depressed at 5.5, we're going to have an opportunity for some offense here. Wouldn't shock me at all if we're talking about a 4-2 finish in Game 1. I'll go over the total here, mainly because the money line on the Panthers kind of has gotten out of range so far.
Yeah, in the season series, which is definitely different than playoff hockey, but the Panthers put up 5 goals twice, once at home and once on the road. Now, the last time the Oilers won the Stanley Cup, the Panthers weren't even a franchise yet. The Cats are going for their first ever Cup title. Allen, who wins it in your opinion?
Well, I was actually playing the last time that they won a title in Edmonton, and I wasn't too happy about it because I wasn't on that team. But I'm going to go with, not my hometown, I'm going to go with the Florida 7 games in this series. I just think the way they're constructed, the depth that they have, they can get on the power play. They're going to have a really good penalty kill. They're going to have to stay out of the penalty box. But I just think last year's scar tissue from losing is very important. The scar tissue from the year before from the players that are still there when they got pushed out rather easily. I think that the Panthers have every ingredient. They've got a calm and cool coach. Everything seems to be going their way right now. And once again, the depth of the roster and believing in their system. They play almost identical system, but they are more physical. I'm going Panthers in 7 games.
All right, Todd, when it comes to a best bet for the Stanley Cup Final, what's catching your eye?
I'm actually with Allen here, and I wouldn't actually have any qualms about laying a 1.5 games with the Panthers if you wanted to juice things up a little bit out to plus 170. But I think the Panthers are a team that used last year as a rallying cry. And you saw the graphic a little bit earlier in the segment. It's not often that teams that lose the year before get back to the Stanley Cup Final. Paul Maurice seems to have his fingers on the pulse of this team, and he gave the group one of the utmost compliments you can get this deep into the postseason. He says, we're at a point where these guys are kind of coaching themselves. I think everybody on this Florida roster knows what their role is. They have an identity. And Allen mentioned the overall health. Aaron Ekblad wasn't shy about saying how difficult it was to play with a banged-up foot. We know Matthew Tkachuk wasn't even available in that closeout game with the broken sternum. And the wealth of riches that Florida has on this roster now, getting players like Gustav Forsling to emerge on the blue line, Brandon Montour, who hasn't even contributed offensively. I love what the Oilers have done. They've shown the grit. They've shown the tenacity to get to this point, winning low-scoring games that we didn't think was in their DNA, but I just feel like everything is coming together at the right time for the Florida Panthers. They're battle tested, and Connor McDavid and company may have to wait at least one more season before they can engrave their name on the Stanley Cup. For the first time in franchise history, it'll be the Florida Panthers bringing the hardest trophy in sports to win back to South Florida.
All right, so you guys are on the same page when it comes to who is going to win the Cup. Let's talk about the Conn Smythe. Connor McDavid currently has the shortest odds there at plus 250. Barkey is at 4-1. Alan, we'll start with you. Who do you like to win the Conn Smythe?
Well, those are my two guys for both of the teams, but I think through the first 4 games, it's really going to tell who's going to be, the top defensive player shutting down McDavid, or is McDavid going to be able to continue to create offense and win games, not by himself, but win games once again. I'm going to go with Connor McDavid in this. He's leading the league in points right now, and he's leading in assists, and he's been hurt through the first couple series. It's not documented, but he didn't look like himself. Now he's flying once again. What he was able to do in the last game, the first goal, the assist on the second goal. I look at all of those things. He's not going to slow down. He's got an intensity about him. So I'm going all the way with Connor McDavid on this one.
25 assists through the first 3 rounds for Connor McDavid. It puts him in rarefied air with one other player that even the casual hockey fan knows all too well, who happens to have his number 99 hung from the rafters in Edmonton. So you can understand why McDavid is the heavy favorite here. And while I won't quite say it's a 1-to-1 mapping, if the Oilers do win the Cup, I'd feel more comfortable backing McDavid to win the Conn Smythe than I would Edmonton at a slightly shorter price, although Leon Draisaitl and Evan Bouchard have shorter odds as well. But I think, Jacqueline and Alan, this is an opportunity for us to live a little dangerously and take some flyers on long shots. So I'll give you one on either side, and we can start with the team that I think wins the Cup in the Florida Panthers. Carter Verhaeghe is a player that has typically flown under the radar. We look at Sasha Barkov and what he adds as a 200-foot centerman, Matthew Tkachuk as kind of the face of this franchise, but Verhaeghe's the guy that can go out there and score goals in bunches. If he happens to have a Stanley Cup Final, like we saw from Jonathan Marchessault last year, I think the price tag on Verhaeghe at 24-1 is too hard to ignore, so I think that's worth a small bet. And then on the other side for Edmonton, it's all about the big 3 for the Oilers, but there is a player that does lead this team in goals, and it's not coincidence that Zach Hyman was able to put up 50+ during the regular season. I was shocked to see the price tag on Hyman to win the Conn Smythe. Do I think he wins? No, probably not, but at 110-1, that's worth at least a small wager, and it would take a page out of the Andre Iguodala playbook when he ended up taking home NBA Finals MVP at 125-1. Hyman may have to score 7 or 8 goals to make this happen, but you can make a lot worse bets than betting one of the team's leading goal scorers at north of 100-1.
110-1 for Hyman, 25-1 for Verhaeghe, who, by the way, has 9 goals and 8 assists this postseason. Alan, Todd, we appreciate it stopping by for Stanley Cup Final picks and storylines. Thank you so much, guys. And, of course, Game 1, that is on Saturday, 8 Eastern, June 8th. Game 2, that is also in Sunrise. Games 3 and 4, those go back to Edmonton. Game 5, if necessary, will be Sunrise, Edmonton for Game 6, and then Sunrise again for Game 7 if we get a Game 7.